The Fellowship of the Ring. When you were little, did you ever lie on a couch or bed and hang your head over the edge to look at the room upside down? All of a sudden, things were very familiar to you. All of a sudden, things that were very familiar to you looked strange and cold. That piano hanging from the ceiling, for instance. Similar to this, good writers make you look at ordinary things differently. And once you learn this trick, you can just keep going. This doesn't mean that you're constantly confused about your living room, but rather that you have looked at it so many different ways that you now understand it in its ordinary setting. If you excel at this, you will come to be amazed that a right-side-up piano sticks to the floor. We necessarily see things first in their first appearance, but through reading and meditating on books like this, we should learn to get past that. For example, when the hobbits first meet Strider, they have been fleeing from the Nazgul, and so they are understandably suspicious. But they are reassured and decide that Strider is a good man. As Frodo put it, if Strider had been evil, he would seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand. Little Macbeth reference there. But even when they decide that he is not evil and that he might be a help to them, they have no idea what kind of man he is. He is going to be revealed much later as a very different kind of good character than how he first appears. If we learn to think past superficial appearances, Strider, and at the same time take appearances realistically into account, Gollum, we are learning to look at the world from different angles, but in such a way as to keep the constant things constant. Another good example of this involves Strider again. Perhaps some of you have seen the bumper sticker that says, "Not all those who wander are lost." What other bumper stickers do you frequently see? I don't know about you, but I see stickers about freeing Tibet, the Grateful Dead, and stickers for the Green Party, presidential candidate, whoever that was. Sticker for the Green Party presidential candidate. And yet, the quote comes from one of the noblest characters in a Christian novel. See, appearances can be tricky. Although the chances are good that the fellow who put it on his car did not really understand what he was saying. Let's look at it from different angles, hanging our head off the couch. Some people who wander are lost, like Gollum. Some people who are lost don't wander at all, like the malicious tree in Bombadil's wood, filled with a hatred of things that go free upon the earth. Some people who don't wander aren't lost, like old Farmer Maggot. But not all who wander are lost, like Strider. A lot depends. In order to see things upside down without getting confused, it is important to be looking at concrete things, like the furniture in your living room or characters in a story, such as the story we are now about to read. It is crucial that we not try this with abstractions. If we only have the bumper sticker, we don't know if the person has read Tolkien with wisdom, or if he has read Tolkien and completely missed the point of it, or if he has never read Tolkien and just picked the bumper sticker, just picked it up somewhere. Maybe it is his mother's car. Our task is different. We want to enjoy the Fellowship of the Ring and learn wisdom through very different characters. We are safe doing this in this story, for we are in the hands of a very great writer. General information. Main characters. The Fellowship of the Ring introduces us to Bilbo's heir and successor, Frodo. His most important inheritance is the ring that Bilbo obtained from Gollum, but that odd ring has now been discovered to be the One Ring of Power, Frodo is accompanied on his adventure by his loyal attendant Samwise Gamgee. Filling out the entourage of hobbits, we find Merry and Pippin. Gandalf the Grey is a central character in this book, and we start to discover how important he is to all of Middle-earth. The hobbits travel first to the house of Elrond, one of the great elves, at Rivendell. There, a council is held that determines that the ring must be destroyed. This mission is entrusted to a fellowship of representatives from all the noble races of Middle-earth. The Fellowship of the Ring includes Gandalf the Wizard, Frodo and his 3 hobbit companions, Legolas the Elf, Gimli the Dwarf, and 2 men, Boromir and Aragorn. The Fellowship eventually meets the Elven Queen Galadriel in the forest of Lothlorien. Worldview. As we consider the Fellowship of the Ring, we will review some of the basic principles discussed in the essay on The Hobbit, and point out how those principles are reinforced by themes and events in this book. Then we will move on to any worldview issues that we have not yet discussed. On the subject of magic, the fundamental issue for Christians in this book is the magician's desire for power and control. A magician seeks to manipulate the matter around him in such a way as to wield power over it and through it over others. As such, depending on motives, there might be very little spiritual difference between an alchemist and a chemist. Magic should therefore not be defined as doing something remarkable. When Jesus walked on water, was he doing magic? No. Rather, magic is trying to wrest power from the created order in order to exercise that power over others. This is to be distinguished from exercising dominion, which works with the created order in order to serve God and others. Tolkien certainly regarded the magic of Sauron and Saruman as evil and wicked, but he also did not really distinguish it from what many moderns would call the advance of science. Tolkien, like his friend C.S. Lewis, had fought in the First World War. In fact, his foundational image for Mordor was the great industrial war machine set up in France in World War I to destroy hundreds of thousands of young men there. Tolkien hated things that clanked and smoked and believed they would always bite and devour. He saw modernization as just another manifestation of man's temptation to manipulate matter in order to get this kind of mastery or control. This, for Tolkien, was the heart of magic, and it was to be decisively rejected. This helps us make sense of the decision reached at the Council of Elrond. The Lord of the Rings is not a book promoting magic with a little good guy magic or white magic thrown in to make it palatable for Christians. The Lord of the Rings is actually one of the most profoundly anti-magic books available. Why is this? If magic is about acquiring the power to wield power over others, and then doing so, what does the Council of Elrond decide to do? Through an odd circumstance, they came to possess the Ring of Power, and this ring, wielded by someone like Gandalf or Elrond, would overthrow Sauron and all their enemies completely. They would be able to wield power decisively, but when they had overthrown Sauron, they would discover that they had done so by becoming Sauron. This is why they decide to destroy the ring. When Frodo, at the fateful moment, says, "I will take the ring," he is saying not just that he will undertake a very dangerous mission. It is indeed dangerous, but fundamentally it is a mission of repudiation. The good guys have the ultimate weapon, the ultimate power, and they refuse to use it. They repudiate that ultimate power. Reject it. Think for a moment how strange this is as a storyline. Most wartime adventure stories are about trying to acquire a great weapon or destroy one in the enemy's possession. This story is about trying to destroy the enemy's great weapon that is in your possession the entire time. So, this is the great test Gandalf passes early on. "No," cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. "With that power I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly." Elrond passes the test at the council. "I fear to take the ring to hide it. I will not take the ring to wield it." Late in the book, Galadriel passes the test and speaks of it explicitly in those terms. "I passed the test," she said. "I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel." At the end of this book, in the breaking of the Fellowship of the Ring, Boromir fails the test, although he does redeem himself in his valiant death. But the reason he failed the test is that he never understood the underlying principle. And one of the great blessings for students in reading this book is that of learning this principle. At the Council of Elrond, Boromir deferred to the judgment of others, but the reason they had for attempting to destroy the ring did not make deep spiritual sense to him. "I do not understand all this," he said. "Why do you speak ever of hiding and destroying?" And because of this lack of wisdom, he faltered when he was tempted. He did not lack courage, but he did not have the right kind of wisdom. All this reveals the basic difference between magicians and those who are not magicians. Gandalf says that what they have decided to do is an option that would never even occur to Sauron. He could not conceive of doing something like this himself, and therefore cannot imagine if his enemies came to possess the ring, that they would attempt to destroy it, because, quote, "the only measure that he knows is desire for power, and so he judges all hearts." Related to this is the reason why Saruman fell. As Elrond put it, "It is perilous to study too deeply the arts of the enemy, for good or for ill. When good confronts evil, there is always a temptation to fight fire with fire. But those who fight evil must constantly beware of the temptation of becoming what they are fighting." We see the same kind of issue, though on a smaller scale, when we see the effect that the ring has had on Bilbo. And we come to expect similar things with Frodo the Ring-bearer. When Gandalf is explaining how he became suspicious about the ring, the effect that it had had on Bilbo was one of his concerns. In the essay on The Hobbit, it was explained that Bilbo obtained the ring through means that were not, strictly speaking, honest. This is made explicit in the Fellowship of the Ring. Quote, "When I at last got the truth out of him, I saw at once that he had been trying to put his claim to the ring beyond doubt, much like Gollum with his birthday present. The lies were too much alike for my comfort." But the resilience and toughness of hobbits is nevertheless seen in this, far more than in their latent abilities in adventuring. Bilbo is affected by the ring, but he possessed it for many years without becoming possessed by it. For he gave it up in the end of his own accord, an important point. Frodo shows the same tough resilience, almost to the end. In the background material on The Hobbit, we learn that elves and orcs and hobbits were representative of various aspects of man. In the First World War, Tolkien acquired a high respect for the nobility of ordinary foot soldiers from non-aristocratic backgrounds. In Tolkien's mind, hobbits were representative of the common, sturdy individual of this type, and his depiction of hobbits in this way shows his high respect for ordinary people. An essential part of Tolkien's admiration is seen in the hobbits' resistance to what might be called the high temptations. While Tolkien honors the ordinariness of the hobbits in their shire, he also shows that they ungratefully had taken far too much for granted. They were in fact sheltered, but they had ceased to remember it. Among the noble races of Middle-earth, Tolkien realistically shows us that all is not universal peace and harmony. There are differences between them, and there are tensions. Tolkien paints the dwarves in such a way as to make us sympathize with them in their differences with the elves. And he paints the elves in such a way as to make us sympathize with them as well. This is one of the reasons why time in Middle-earth helps a thoughtful reader to think more like a charitable Christian. A common temptation for many is to view the world as though one's own perspective is the only perspective possible. Reading stories like this helps us to both sympathize with dwarves and be exasperated with dwarves. We love the Shire and yet can be exasperated with the hobbits. We see that men are the cause of much turmoil in the world, and yet we find that men are found selflessly and thanklessly protecting the Shire. Tom Bombadil tells the hobbits of sons of forgotten kings walking in loneliness. Shortly after this, we meet Strider the Ranger, who is part of a band of men protecting the hobbits, who blissfully take everything for granted. Hobbits spent their time in a particular way and consistently took things for granted. Growing food and eating it occupied most of their time. And the hobbits are cautioned by the elf Gildor early in their adventures. Quote, "The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out." But although hobbits are capable of taking things for granted and growing very fat as they do so, there is much more to them than this. Quote, "There is a seed of courage hidden, often deeply, it is true, in the heart of the fattest and most timid hobbit, waiting for some final and desperate danger to make it grow." J.R.R. Tolkien, quote, cordially disliked allegory in all its manifestations, and I'm afraid we would annoy him terribly if we tried to read The Lord of the Rings in an allegorical way, as an extended metaphor. We therefore ought not to try to piece together a meaning for the books that is tied to general truths or abstractions or to events in our own world. The Ring did not stand for the atomic bomb, for example, although some have tried to read it in that way. As C.S. Lewis pointed out, the chronology of this is impossible because Tolkien had been working on this story about the Ring of Power long before the atom bomb was invented. And the story of Middle-earth should not be read as a Christian allegory either, with various characters representing different traits or characteristics, as in Pilgrim's Progress, or even anything as indirect as C.S. Lewis's supposal about a character like Aslan. Having said this and emphasized it, we still have to qualify it. This is because Tolkien was self-consciously writing mythology. And this meant that he was appealing to the great themes of human existence. And this means that characters like Gandalf and Aragorn have to be understood as Christ figures. This is different from saying that they represent Christ in an allegorical way. Aragorn is not Christ in that world, and neither is Gandalf. But because of how God made the world, the pattern of death and resurrection is inescapable. And fictional characters who go through that process are, to that extent, a Christ figure, also called a type of Christ. We see the first part of this with Gandalf in The Fellowship of the Ring. We'll discuss Aragorn later. He stands between the rest of the Fellowship and the Balrog in the mines of Moria, and he falls into the depths as a result of his fight with that monster. His last words were, "Fly, you fools!" In his death for others, Gandalf is very much a Christ figure. As we saw in The Hobbit, Bilbo grew in his abilities throughout that book, and he became a much worthier hobbit. This is the theme that runs throughout these works. Frodo shrinks from the responsibility that has been handed to him, but Gandalf admonishes him. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Throughout Middle-earth, reality is never optional. Quote, "But you have been chosen, and you must therefore use such strength and heart and wits as you have." Another point is this. Christians differ among themselves about the course of history and whether it will have what we call a happy ending. All Christians are ultimately optimistic because all Christians believe in heaven. But Christians do differ among themselves about whether history prior to the end of the world will end well. Tolkien very definitively belonged to the group that thought of history as containing tales of great nobility surrounded by sadness. Before Strider sings a particular lay, he says, "It is sad, as are all the tales of Middle-earth." And Galadriel speaks of it this way: "Through the ages of the world we have fought the long defeat." This was very much Tolkien's frame of mind and fit his personality well. This lines up with the Norse mythology that he loved so well, where the Norse eschatology, the explanation of end times, eschatology, has the gods and monsters fight it out at the very end of the world, and the gods lose. In the Norse and Anglo-Saxon world, defeat was no refutation at all. The whole universe is just one gigantic Alamo. Remember the Alamo? This makes for tales of great courage, but is also something of a downer. One of the problems that the Anglo-Saxons had to solve was how to incorporate the ultimately optimistic Christian vision with their own pessimistic way of looking at everything. One last comment needs to be made about the very eccentric character of Tom Bombadil, a sort of Middle-earth Melchizedek. He combines a robust sunniness and goodness with an almost comparable carelessness about the great issues that are afflicting Middle-earth. If he were given the ring, he would not be seduced by it, but it is also true that he would probably lose it. He is a very entertaining character, and for various reasons, he doesn't quite fit in the books, any more than he fits in the world events that are swirling around him. "Eldest, that's what I am." Speaking of himself, Tom says, Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. Unlike Gandalf and Aragorn, Tom Bombadil does not really constitute a Christ figure. He's too detached, too impervious. The speculation offered by Robert Forster is probably the best. Quote, "A being, lord and master of the old forest. His race is unknown, although it is possible that he was a Maya gone native. Maiar were lesser Ainur angelic beings, and other examples of them would include Sauron and the Balrogs. But we will not talk about the Balrogs too much, because you do have to get to sleep tonight." Essay by Douglas Wilson.